think punishment in clinical practice is just putting a kid in a timeout. Think again.
Oh, it is so much more than that.
Right. I mean, in applied behavior analysis, it is a highly regulated, like scientifically precise procedure.
Absolutely.
Doing it wrong doesn't just mean you fail your exam. It means you are, committing an actual ethical violation.
Which is exactly what we are here to prevent.
Exactly. So welcome to this deep dive. I'm looking right at you, the learner. Our mission today is mastering BACB's 6th edition task list item G.17, which is design and evaluate positive and negative punishment.
A huge topic.
Yeah, massive. We have a huge stack of sources today, like mock exams, study guides, the ethics code, and we're going to extract exactly what you need to know to pass the exam and become a top 1% BCBA coach.
It is great to be here. And, let's set the standard right from the start today.
Let's do it.
Today is about moving past rote textbook definitions. We are going to deconstruct the clinical application, the underlying behavioral mechanisms, and the profound ethical gravity of punishment procedures.
Right, because we're training clinicians here.
Exactly. We are training clinicians today, not just test takers.
I love that. And I think the best place to start is really by clearing up the semantic baggage that most people bring into this field.
Oh, the semantic baggage is heavy.
Right. When we talk about positive and negative punishment in ABA, we kind of have to completely throw our everyday vocabulary out the window.
We really do.
Because the general public hears positive and they think good or, rewarding, and they hear negative and think bad.
Which is completely wrong in our science.
Yeah, in our science, it's just math. Positive simply means adding a stimulus to the environment. Negative means removing a stimulus from the environment.
There is absolutely no moral judgment attached to those words at all.
Exactly.
And that is a critical distinction, right? It sets up the clinical definition flawlessly. The definition of punishment rests entirely on one single criterion, and that's its effect on future behavior.
So it's all about the future frequency.
Yes. If a consequence does not decrease the future frequency of the targeted behavior, it is simply not punishment. Period.
Even if it looks like punishment to someone watching.
Exactly. It does not matter how aversive it seems to the clinician or how loud a reprimand is. So positive punishment means adding a stimulus following a behavior which directly results in a decrease in the future occurrence of that behavior.
Right. And negative punishment.
Negative punishment means removing a stimulus, typically a preferred one, following a behavior, which also decreases its future occurrence.
Okay, so if we take a classic example, like a teenager coming home past curfew, and their parents take away their car keys for a week.
A very common example.
Yeah, and as a result, the teenager stops missing curfew. That is negative punishment, right? We remove the keys, and the behavior coming in late decreased.
Perfect example of negative punishment.
But, as I look through our sources, the positive punishment procedures seem a whole lot more nuanced than just giving a reprimand.
Oh, absolutely. They are highly technical.
Right. We have procedures like restitutional overcorrection and positive practice. And if I'm interpreting the mechanics here correctly, restitutional overcorrection isn't just about making someone clean up a mess they made.
No, that would just be simple correction.
Right, simple correction. So the over part implies they have to leave the environment in a vastly better state than it was before the behavior occurred.
You have pinpointed the exact mechanism that makes it a punisher. Simple correction is often not aversive enough to decrease future behavior.
Because it's just fixing what you did.
Right. It's just the natural consequence of an action. Restitutional overcorrection is specifically designed to be an added effort.
Can you give us an example of what that looks like in a clinic?
Sure. So if a client in a clinic gets frustrated and, say, dumps a bin of Legos on the floor.
Which happens all the time.
Right. Simple correction is making them pick up the Legos. But restitutional overcorrection might require them to pick up the Legos and then, organize every single other toy bin in that entire play area.
Wow, okay. That is a lot of extra work.
Exactly. The significant physical effort required to perform that extended task is the added aversive stimulus.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
The sheer effort makes the original behavior incredibly costly to the individual.
Yes, the response cost is high. Well, not the procedure response cost, but the physical cost of responding.
Right. And following that logic, positive practice would operate similarly, but instead of repairing the environment, you're targeting the physical movement of the behavior itself.
You're focusing on the topography.
Like if a student runs down the hallway, instead of walking, you don't just have them walk back once.
No, you make them practice the correct way.
Right, you make them return to the starting line and practice walking down that same hallway like 5 times in a row.
Exactly. You are adding a repetition of the correct response to decrease the future frequency of the incorrect response.
That's brilliant.
And it builds muscle memory for the correct behavior while simultaneously serving as an aversive consequence for the maladaptive behavior.
Double duty.
Yes. But, understanding these mechanics abstractly is really only half the battle. To see how these variables interact in a complex environment, we have to look at how they're applied clinically.
Let's do exactly that. Because seeing the effort involved in overcorrection naturally leads us to how we evaluate the cost of behavior in a real-world setting.
Which brings us to the Eli scenario.
Yes, there's an applied scenario in the mock exams regarding a client named Eli. So Eli is a developmentally disabled adult living in a group home, and the staff relies heavily on a token economy.
A staple in residential settings.
Right. Residents earn tokens to trade for edibles and tangible items. But Eli occasionally engages in aggressive behavior, like he breaks items in the common area. And the staff wants to implement response costs.
This is a scenario where clinicians have to be incredibly precise. A response cost operates exactly like a financial fine in the real world.
Like a speeding ticket.
Exactly like a speeding ticket. In Eli's case, if he breaks an item, he loses 5 tokens that he has already earned.
Okay, so they're physically taking those earned tokens off his board.
Right. The preferred stimulus, the tokens, which represent access to reinforcers, is removed. The specific goal is that this removal decreases the future frequency of his aggression.
But there's a mechanical caveat there, isn't there? I mean, for a fine to work, you have to have something to lose in the first place.
Exactly. And this is a huge clinical trap. A major failure point with response cost is when a client goes bankrupt.
Right, if they have 0 tokens.
If Eli has 0 tokens, the response cost procedure is entirely impotent. It does nothing.
You can't find someone who's broke.
Right. This is why you must ensure a high rate of reinforcement for appropriate behavior, so there's always a cost available to leverage.
That makes total sense.
Now, contrast that response cost with how we would handle the exact same behavior using restitutional overcorrection.
Okay, let's compare them.
If Eli breaks a lamp, he doesn't lose his tokens. Instead, he must clean up the broken pieces, and then he is required to vacuum the entire common area, wiping down all the tables.
So the function is the same, right? Decreasing aggression.
The function is exactly the same, but the topographical application is entirely different.
Seeing those two procedures side by side really highlights the clinical decision-making required. You have to, weigh whether it's more effective to remove a conditioned reinforcer or add an effortful task based on Eli's specific profile.
It's individualized treatment at its core.
But the sources detail another procedure that completely recontextualized how I view negative punishment. It's a procedure used for a client named Danica. It's called a timeout ribbon.
The timeout ribbon. Such a fascinating procedure.
Yeah, because when most people hear timeout, they picture the exclusionary model. Sending a kid to sit in a corner facing a wall or putting them in a separate room entirely.
Which has its own set of huge ethical issues.
Right, but a ribbon procedure is totally different.
Yes, the timeout ribbon is a brilliant, highly effective form of non-exclusionary timeout. In this model, the individual is not physically removed from the learning environment at all.
Right, so she stays right there in the room.
She stays right there. For Danica, she wears a specific, easily identifiable ribbon on her wrist. And while that ribbon is on, it acts as a discriminative stimulus.
It signals something to her.
Exactly. It signals to her that positive reinforcement, whether that's staff attention, praise, or access to preferred activities, is fully available. It is the definitive time-in signal.
So the environment itself is paired with the ribbon. And I'm deducing that if she engages in a target maladaptive behavior, say making verbal threats, the clinician simply removes the ribbon.
The ribbon is immediately removed, and the moment it comes off, all access to reinforcement is suspended for a brief, specified duration.
Oh, wow. So she's just sitting there.
The staff stops interacting with her. She cannot access preferred items, but she remains physically present in the room. She can see the reinforcement happening around her, but she cannot access it.
That is so powerful.
It is. And once the designated time is up, the ribbon goes back on and reinforcement resumes immediately.
That is so much more sophisticated than just isolating someone. I mean, you are actively teaching the discrimination between reinforcement is available and reinforcement is unavailable without ever breaking the continuity of the learning environment.
You're keeping them in the instructional setting, which is vital.
But hearing you describe the precision required for the ribbon procedure makes me realize how easily this goes wrong if a clinician doesn't, understand those underlying mechanisms.
And they often don't.
Right, so let's look at where practitioners actually fail in the field. The first clinical trap our sources highlight is what we can call the start small myth.
This is perhaps the most pervasive and honestly dangerous misunderstanding among well-meaning practitioners.
Because it seems so intuitive to a layperson. I mean, if you have to use a punisher, shouldn't a compassionate clinician start with a very mild punisher?
That's what your gut tells you?
Right, and then if the behavior doesn't stop, you slowly turn up the intensity. It just feels like the ethical, gentle way to approach behavior reduction.
It might feel gentle to the practitioner, but clinically, it is a catastrophic error. The literature is extremely clear on this mechanism.
How so?
Starting with a low-magnitude punisher and gradually increasing it directly promotes habituation.
It's kind of like walking into a cold pool. Right.
It's a perfect analogy.
Yeah, like if you go in an inch at a time, your body adjusts to the temperature, you habituate. By the time you're waist deep, it doesn't even feel cold anymore.
Exactly.
So if a clinician inches the magnitude up, the client just builds a tolerance to the intervention.
That is the exact behavioral mechanism at play. The client gets used to the mild aversive, then you turn it up slightly, and they get used to that.
And it just escalates.
Before you know it, you are using a severely harsh punisher that still isn't working. Whereas a moderate punisher applied at full strength on day one would have immediately suppressed the behavior.
Wow. So trying to be gentle actually causes more harm.
Yes. The ethical standard is that you must administer punishment at the highest magnitude that will be used during the intervention right from the very beginning.
You don't build up to it.
No. The clinical objective of punishment is to suppress the dangerous behavior as rapidly as possible so the intervention is brief. Prolonging a client's exposure to punishment because you started too low is, frankly, functionally unethical.
That requires a complete paradigm shift for anyone entering the field. But that naturally leads us to trap number 2, which focuses not on the client's behavior, but on the practitioner's behavior.
Yes, practitioners are behaving organisms too.
Exactly. The sources detail a negative reinforcement trap for clinicians. Let's really analyze the contingencies happening here, because this is wild.
Elite clinicians must constantly analyze their own behavior, and this trap is exactly why.
Walk us through it.
Imagine a staff member is dealing with a client who is engaging in severe, high-volume demanding behavior. The staff member is stressed, the environment is totally chaotic.
Oh, we've all been there. It's overwhelming.
Right, and the staff member finally snaps and delivers a very harsh reprimand. Startled, the client immediately stops the behavior.
So mechanically, the reprimand functioned as positive punishment for the client. The behavior ceased.
Yes, but look at the immediate consequence for the staff member.
Oh.
The highly aversive, highly stressful situation, the client screaming, was instantly removed following the clinician's reprimand.
Wow. So the staff member's behavior of yelling was just negatively reinforced.
Exactly. The clinician gets immediate relief. The aversive stimulus is gone.
And because their yelling was negatively reinforced.
The future frequency of the clinician using harsh reprimands increases. This is exactly how practitioners get hooked on using punishment. It's an insidious cycle.
They're essentially medicating their own stress.
That's a great way to put it. They rely on the quick fix that relieves their own stress instead of doing the much harder, much slower work of teaching replacement skills through positive reinforcement.
Which leads to crossing boundaries.
Yes, it leads to the overuse of punishment and is the gateway to crossing serious ethical boundaries.
That is an incredibly important blind spot to identify. You think you are providing treatment, but you are actually just reacting to your own environment in the moment. It completely compromises your objectivity.
It absolutely does.
And that brings us to trap number 3, which is another failure of objectivity. Using punishment for escape-maintained behaviors.
A classic error.
There's a specific mock exam question in our stack about a child who consistently runs away from the table to escape academic tasks. And the proposed solution is to put them in timeout.
If we look closely at the function of the behavior, the error here is just glaring. We just define timeout as the removal of a reinforcing environment.
Right. The time and setting has to be reinforcing.
But what if the environment isn't reinforcing? What if the child finds the academic task highly aversive?
Well, if the function of running away is to escape the task, and you send them to timeout,
You just removed the task.
you gave them exactly what they wanted.
Correct. For an escape-maintained behavior, timeout does not function as negative punishment. It functions as negative reinforcement.
Because you removed the demand.
You removed the aversive demand, which guarantees that the child will run away even faster the next time you present that math worksheet. You have actively strengthened the maladaptive behavior by applying the wrong procedure.
The reason we just spent so much time, dissecting how clinicians accidentally reinforce themselves or accidentally reinforce their clients is because the test makers at Pearson VUE know these blind spots exist.
They know exactly where the traps are.
Right. They engineer the exam specifically to catch clinicians who rely on gut instinct instead of behavioral science. So let's pivot to exactly how these concepts are weaponized on the exam.
Let's do it.
Our first scenario. You are presented with a question asking for the best combination of procedures to use alongside a punishment intervention. What is the clinical logic here?
When you see a question asking about procedures to pair with punishment, you immediately look for DRA and extinction.
DRA being differential reinforcement of alternative behavior.
Yes.
But why is that specific combination mandatory? Like, why can't we just punish the dangerous behavior and move on?
Because punishment only suppresses behavior, right? It does not teach a new one.
Okay.
If you only use punishment, you create a behavioral vacuum. Ethics Code 4.08 explicitly dictates that if you implement a punishment procedure, you must always include reinforcement procedures for an alternative appropriate behavior.
You have to give them a replacement.
You have to build a new road for the client to get their needs met. Furthermore, you must implement extinction on the target behavior.
Because otherwise they might still get reinforced sometime.
Exactly. If the maladaptive behavior is still occasionally contacting reinforcement, your punishment procedure is fighting an uphill battle. You have to place a roadblock on the old behavior through extinction and build a new heavily reinforced road through DRA.
I see the logic there. You have to shut off the maintaining reinforcement entirely while simultaneously teaching the replacement. Okay, let's look at the second exam trap. You were given a scenario where a punishment procedure has been in place for a week, but the target behavior is still occurring at baseline levels.
Very common scenario.
And the question asks you to evaluate why. Now, a very tempting distractor answer on the test is the punisher is too weak. But scientifically, why is that always the wrong answer?
It is a definitional trap. If the stimulus being applied was actually a punisher, the behavior would have decreased.
Right, going back to our definition.
That is the sole defining characteristic of punishment. If the behavior is still occurring, you cannot clinically call the consequence a weak punisher. It simply isn't a punisher at all.
Right, because we define it by its effect. So if it hasn't had an effect, what do we look for as the correct answer?
You look for issues with treatment integrity, or you look for competing reinforcement contingencies.
Like maybe the staff isn't following the plan.
Exactly. The procedure might be implemented inconsistently across different staff members. Or the behavior is still contacting a massive amount of reinforcement that mathematically outweighs the aversive consequence you added.
So it's an environmental issue.
Always. You never blame the strength of the punisher. You investigate your environmental variables.
That level of technical precision is exactly what separates passing from failing.
Absolutely.
Here is our third exam scenario. In the source data, there's a case study about a child named Kiki who has begun darting out of her yard and running into a busy street.
Terrifying behavior.
It is a life-threatening behavior. The team needs to identify an effective punisher immediately to suppress this. The question asks for the most effective way of identifying a possible punisher.
Now, the exam will offer distractors like interview the parents about what Kiki dislikes or select a universally aversive stimulus like a loud noise.
Which, again, might sound reasonable to someone untrained.
Right. But the only correct answer is to conduct punisher assessments.
So, just as we systematically run preference assessments to see what a client will work for, we have to run assessments to see what they will actively avoid. We can't just, guess based on an interview.
Absolutely not. Guessing is subjective and highly risky, especially in a life-threatening scenario like Kiki running into traffic.
Because if you guess wrong...
If you rely on a parent interview, you might select a consequence the child actually finds neutral, wasting precious time while Kiki is actively in danger.
Wow, right. You don't have time to be wrong.
Exactly. Conversely, you might pick something unnecessarily harsh and traumatizing, which is a gross ethical violation. During a punisher assessment, you systematically measure the client's avoidance or escape movements when presented with various stimuli.
Very structured.
Highly structured. You measure it objectively to find the lowest effective magnitude that will rapidly suppress the behavior You don't guess with a child's life.
You don't guess with a child's life. That really puts it in perspective.
Yeah.
So passing the exam is largely about navigating these technical definitions and avoiding these emotional traps.
It is.
But our mission today is to build top 1% practitioners.
Yeah.
When you look at the sources, what fundamentally separates a clinician who can pass the test from an elite clinical director making these decisions out in the field?
It all comes down to the application of ethics codes 2.14 and 2.15.
Which state what exactly?
Elite clinicians operate under a primary non-negotiable directive: minimizing risk. A top-tier director does not jump to punishment simply because it is fast or, because the staff is stressed.
They don't take the easy way out.
Never. You are ethically mandated to exhaust less intrusive, positive reinforcement-based procedures first. You must prove that you try to teach the skill and alter the environment before you ever consider adding an aversive.
But, the sources also acknowledge that there are exceptions. Let's go back to Kiki running into traffic. You cannot spend 6 weeks shaping a replacement behavior while she is actively engaging in something that could kill her today.
And that is the crucial exception. If you must use restrictive procedures because the inherent danger of the behavior severely outweighs the risk of the intervention, you move forward.
But with strict parameters.
Under strict, uncompromising parameters. Elite clinicians do not act in a silo. You must secure review and approval from a human rights committee.
You need oversight.
Extensive oversight. You must take rigorous, continuous data on the intervention's efficacy. And the absolute key difference in elite practice: you must discontinue the procedure immediately if the data shows it isn't working.
You don't just keep punishing a kid for no reason.
Exactly. Punishment is a temporary adjunctive tool designed to quickly clear the way for skill acquisition. It is a bridge to get the client to safety. It is never, under any circumstances, a permanent lifestyle for a client.
It is a bridge, not the destination. I think that perfectly synthesizes the ethical and clinical gravity of what we're discussing.
Isn't this an important takeaway?
As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, specifically regarding timeout. We talked extensively today about timeout being the removal of the opportunity for positive reinforcement.
Right, the ribbon comes off, the reinforcement stops.
But ask yourself this. What if your client's time and environment isn't enriching enough to begin with?
That's a powerful question.
If the natural environment, like the classroom or the clinic, isn't highly reinforcing, dynamic, and joyful, your timeout procedure is essentially meaningless. You cannot take away what isn't there.
You really can't.
If your timeout isn't working, maybe you shouldn't be looking at the punishment procedure. Maybe you should be asking, how reinforcing is your time in?
That is exactly what you should be asking.
If this helped you, follow behavioral intelligence, share this deep dive with another RBT or BCBA who's studying, and leave a comment or review. That's how we grow and how I keep creating high-level content for you.
At Amethyst Therapy Services, Inc., we build clinicians, not just test passers. Visit us at www.amethysttherapyservices.com or reach out at info@amethysttherapyservices.com.